The rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's funeral home like impatient fingers, creating a rhythm that matched the hollow beating in my chest. I stood in the corner of the viewing room, watching strangers file past my father's casket, offering condolences that felt as empty as the space where my heart used to be. The smell of lilies was suffocating, mixing with the cheap coffee and stale air that seemed to cling to every funeral home in Chicago. "Nick, you need to eat something," my friend Sarah whispered, pressing a paper plate with untouched sandwich triangles into my hands. I looked down at the food, my stomach churning at the thought of swallowing anything. Dad had been gone for 3 days now, and I still couldn't believe he was really lying there in that polished oak box, wearing the navy suit he'd only worn to my high school graduation. Marcus stood near the casket, playing the role of the grieving son perfectly. His expensive black suit was pressed to perfection, his dark hair slicked back, and he shook hands with every visitor like he was running for office. At 32, my brother had always been the golden child, the one who got Dad's attention, the one who could do no wrong. Even now, in death, Dad was still bringing out the best in Marcus and leaving me feeling invisible. "Your father was such a good man," Mrs. Patterson from next door said, approaching me with tears in her eyes. "He used to shovel my driveway every winter without me even asking. Never wanted any payment either, just said it was the neighborly thing to do." I nodded and mumbled something appropriate, but inside I was thinking about how Dad had never once helped me with my car when it broke down last winter. I'd had to call a tow truck and pay for repairs with money I didn't have, while he sat in his study, door closed, probably working on those mysterious projects he never talked about. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, suddenly appearing at my elbow. He placed a protective hand on my shoulder, and I could see the performance for what it was. "Nick's taking this pretty hard, as you can imagine." Mrs. Patterson patted my arm sympathetically before moving on, and I shrugged away from Marcus's touch. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral arrangements began, but I could feel his impatience with my quiet grief. He wanted me to bounce back, to help him handle the practical matters, to be useful. "We need to talk about the house," Marcus said quietly, steering me toward a less crowded corner. "I've been going through Dad's papers, and it's not looking good. The mortgage is behind, there are credit card bills, and his medical expenses from the last few months cleaned out most of his savings." My chest tightened. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we'll probably have to sell the house just to break even. There's no inheritance, Nick. I'm sorry, but Dad left us nothing but debt and headaches." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. The house on Maple Street had been in our family for 40 years. Dad had bought it right after he married Mom, had brought both of us home from the hospital to those yellow walls and creaky hardwood floors. The thought of strangers living there, repainting Mom's kitchen, tearing out the garden she'd planted made my throat close up. "There has to be something," I whispered. "Dad worked for 30 years at the plant. He had to have saved something." Marcus's expression softened slightly, but there was something else there. Something that looked almost like pity. "I know this is hard to accept, but Dad wasn't good with money. You know how he was always buying those old tools at garage sales, collecting books he never read? He lived paycheck to paycheck just like most people." The dismissal in his voice sparked something angry in my chest. "He wasn't irresponsible, Marcus. Dad might have been distant, but he wasn't stupid. I'm not saying he was stupid. I'm saying he was human. Look, I've been handling his finances for the past year, helping him with bills when he'd let me. I know what I'm talking about." That stopped me cold. "You've been handling his finances?" "Someone had to. After the heart attack scare last spring, he asked me to help him get organized. I set up automatic payments for his utilities, helped him budget. I was trying to take care of him, Nick." Of course he was. Of course Dad had turned to Marcus when he needed help, just like he always had. I was the daughter who brought him coffee and worried about his health, but Marcus was the son who got trusted with important things like money and decisions. The funeral director, a thin man with kind eyes, approached us discreetly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we'll need to begin the final viewing in about 10 minutes. Marcus nodded and straightened his tie. "We'll be ready." As the man walked away, I looked around the room at the dwindling crowd. Most of Dad's coworkers had already left, and only a few family friends remained. In a few hours, this would all be over, and Dad would be in the ground, and Marcus and I would have to figure out how to be siblings without him as the connection between us. "I want to help go through his things," I said suddenly, "before we put the house on the market. There might be something you missed." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've been thorough, Nick. I've gone through everything. The desk, the filing cabinets, even that old trunk in the basement. There's nothing of value. I'm not looking for value. I'm looking for answers." "Answers to what?" I turned to face him fully, taking in his perfectly composed expression. "Answers to why he was so different with us. Why you got his attention, and I got his polite smiles. Why he worked so hard but apparently saved nothing. Why he never talked about Mom after she died, or why he kept her sewing room exactly the same for 15 years. Marcus's face softened, and for a moment, he looked like the big brother who used to let me tag along to the park. Some questions don't have answers, Nick. Some people are just hard to understand. Maybe, but I need to try. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Fine. We'll go through the house together this weekend. But after that, we list it. We can't afford to be sentimental about this. I agreed, even though the word sentimental felt like a slap. Wanting to understand your father wasn't sentimental. It was necessary. The funeral director returned, and we took our places for the final goodbye. As I stood beside the casket, looking down at Dad's peaceful face, I made a silent promise. I would find out who he really was, what he really wanted for us, and why Marcus seemed so certain there was nothing left to discover. I had no idea that in 2 days, I would find a key that would change everything. Saturday morning came too soon, gray and drizzling like the city couldn't shake off the gloom of the week. I pulled into the driveway of the house on Maple Street at exactly 9 o'clock, clutching a thermos of coffee like a lifeline. Marcus's BMW was already there, of course. He'd probably been inside for an hour, efficiently sorting through decades of our family's life with the same methodical approach he used for everything else. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front steps, just like it had been since I was 12. Some things never changed, I thought, even when everything else fell apart. The house smelled like Dad's aftershave and the faint mustiness that comes with old furniture and too many closed windows. I stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the place settling, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the grandfather clock ticking in the living room. Nick, that you? Marcus called from upstairs. Yeah, it's me. I kicked off my sneakers and padded up the stairs in my socks, something that would have driven Dad crazy. He was always particular about shoes in the house, said it tracked in dirt, and showed disrespect for Mom's careful housekeeping. I found Marcus in Dad's bedroom, 3 cardboard boxes already packed and labeled in his neat handwriting. Clothes, donation, books, keep, and personal items, decide later. He was folding Dad's flannel shirts with the same precision he probably used for his own expensive dress shirts, and seeing those familiar patterns disappearing into a box made my chest tight. You work fast, I said, settling cross-legged on the carpet beside Dad's nightstand. No point dragging it out. The realtor wants to do a walkthrough on Tuesday. Marcus glanced at me and his expression softened slightly. I saved his watch for you, the one Mom gave him for their anniversary. Figured you might want it. I picked up the simple silver Timex from the nightstand, running my thumb over the scratched face. Dad had worn this every single day for as long as I could remember. Thank you. We worked in companionable silence for a while, sorting through the accumulation of a lifetime. Dad's dresser revealed the expected items: socks with holes he'd never thrown away, a wallet containing $14 and a faded picture of Mom, reading glasses in 3 different strengths because he refused to admit his eyes were getting worse. But it was when I opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand that I found something unexpected. Tucked beneath a stack of old issues of Popular Mechanics was a manila envelope with my name written on it in Dad's careful handwriting. Not Nicole like he usually wrote on birthday cards, but Nick, in the way only my closest friends called me. Marcus, look at this. I held up the envelope, my heart hammering. He stopped folding and came over, frowning at the envelope like it was somehow suspicious. What is it? I don't know yet. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a letter addressed to me, a small brass key attached to a bank keychain, and a photograph I'd never seen before. The photograph showed Dad as a young man, maybe 25, standing next to a beautiful woman with dark hair who definitely wasn't my mother. They were both laughing, and Dad had his arm around her waist in a way that spoke of intimacy. On the back, someone had written Chicago, 1985, in faded blue ink. Who is she? I whispered, showing Marcus the photo. His face went pale, and he grabbed the picture from my hands. I don't know. Probably just a friend from before he met Mom. But something in his voice made me look at him more closely. There was tension around his eyes, the same expression he'd worn as a kid when he broke something and was trying to figure out how to hide it. Marcus, do you know who this is? Of course not. How would I know? He handed the photo back, but his movements were stiff, unnatural. What does the letter say? I unfolded the single sheet of paper, recognizing Dad's handwriting immediately. It was dated just 3 months ago, right around the time he'd had that heart attack scare Marcus mentioned. My dearest Nick, I read aloud, my voice catching on the unexpected endearment. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope Marcus has been taking good care of you. I know I wasn't always the father you deserved. After your mother died, I got lost in my own grief and forgot that you were grieving too. I threw myself into work and left you to figure out how to grow up without the guidance you needed. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." I had to stop reading for a moment, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Dad had never talked about Mom's death, never acknowledged how it had changed all of us. "Keep going," Marcus said quietly. "There are things I never told you about our family, about your mother, about choices I made that I thought were protecting you, but maybe were just protecting me. The key in this envelope opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank on State Street, box number 847. Inside, you'll find some things that might help you understand who I really was and why I made the decisions I did. I love you more than I ever knew how to show. Be kinder to yourself than I was. Love, Dad." The room was completely silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. I stared at the little brass key, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "A safe deposit box," I said, more to myself than to Marcus. He had a safe deposit box. Marcus was very still, his face unreadable. "That doesn't mean there's money in it, Nick. Could be anything. Old documents, more photos. But you said you went through all his financial records. Wouldn't a safe deposit box show up somewhere? On bank statements or something?" "Not necessarily, especially if it's an old account." Marcus started folding shirts again, his movements quick and agitated. "Look, don't get your hopes up. Dad was sentimental about weird things. It's probably just more stuff like this photo." I looked at the photograph again, studying the woman's face. She was beautiful in an understated way, with kind eyes and a warm smile. There was something familiar about her features, but I couldn't place it. "I want to go to the bank," I said. "Today." "The bank's closed today. It's Saturday." "Then Monday. First thing Monday morning." Marcus stopped folding and looked at me directly. "Why is this so important to you? Even if there is something in there, it doesn't change anything. The house still needs to be sold. The debts still need to be paid." I stood up, clutching the letter and the key. Because for the first time since he died, I feel like Dad was actually talking to me. Not around me, not through you, but to me. "He wrote this letter to me, Marcus. He wanted me to find these things." Something flickered across Marcus's face, something that looked almost like guilt. "I just don't want you to be disappointed again." "Again?" He turned back to the shirts, not meeting my eyes. "You know what I mean. Dad disappointed you a lot when he was alive. I don't want his ghost doing it too." I wanted to argue, to tell him that Dad had never really disappointed me because I'd never expected much from him in the first place. But that wasn't entirely true, and we both knew it. I had spent my whole life hoping that someday he would see me the way he saw Marcus, that someday I would matter enough for his attention. Maybe I was about to be disappointed again, but for the first time since Dad died, I felt like I had a chance to really know him, and I wasn't going to let fear or Marcus's pessimism stop me from taking it. "I'm going to the bank on Monday," I said firmly, "with or without you." Marcus sighed and nodded. "Fine. But when there's nothing there but old tax returns and expired insurance policies, don't say I didn't warn you." I slipped the key into my pocket, feeling its weight against my leg as I went back to sorting through Dad's belongings. But my mind wasn't on flannel shirts or old magazines anymore. It was on that photograph, on the mystery woman with the familiar smile, and on the possibility that everything I thought I knew about my father was about to change. Monday morning found me standing outside First National Bank on State Street at exactly 9 a.m., the brass key burning a hole in my pocket like a talisman. I'd barely slept all weekend, my mind spinning with possibilities and questions that had no answers. Marcus had texted me twice, once to remind me not to get my hopes up, and once to ask if I wanted him to come with me. I'd ignored both messages. The bank was one of those old Chicago buildings with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. I approached the information desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Patricia smiled at me professionally. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "My father passed away last week, and I found this key among his belongings." Patricia's expression immediately softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Do you have the box number and some identification?" "Box 847, I said, pulling out my driver's license along with Dad's death certificate, which Marcus had given me copies of, and this letter from my father. She examined the documents carefully, then looked at Dad's letter. "This is very touching," she said gently. "Let me just verify some information in our system. What was your father's full name?" "Robert James Mitchell," she typed on her computer, frowning slightly. "I'm showing that Mr. Mitchell did have a safe deposit box with us, but—" She paused, her expression puzzled. "The account shows 2 authorized signers, your father and a Marcus Mitchell. Would that be a relative?" My stomach dropped. "That's my brother." "I see. Well, either authorized signer can access the box. Let me just check our records to make sure everything is in order." She typed some more, then looked up with a slightly uncomfortable expression. I'm sorry, but it looks like someone already accessed this box. Last Friday afternoon, the world seemed to tilt sideways. Someone accessed it? Yes. Marcus Mitchell came in with proper identification and accessed the box. He had a key as well. She looked at me with growing concern. Are you all right? You look very pale. I gripped the edge of the desk, my mind racing. Marcus had been to the bank. Marcus had already opened the box. Marcus had been lying to me for 4 days. What? What did he take? I managed to ask. I'm sorry, but I can't give you specifics about what was removed. Privacy regulations, you understand. But I can tell you that the box wasn't completely emptied. There are still some items inside. I'd like to see it, please. Patricia nodded and led me through a secure door into the safe deposit box area. The room was small and sterile, filled with rows of metal boxes built into the walls. She located box 847 and inserted her master key, then waited for me to use Dad's key. The box slid out smoothly, smaller than I'd expected but heavier than it looked. I'll give you some privacy, Patricia said, gesturing to a small table with a chair. Take all the time you need. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside were several items that made my breath catch: a thick manila envelope, what looked like legal documents, and a small jewelry box that I recognized from Mom's dresser. But it was obvious that other things had been removed. There were spaces where items had been, impressions in the felt lining that suggested missing objects. I opened the manila envelope first. Inside were dozens of photographs spanning what looked like decades. Photos of Dad as a young man, photos of the mystery woman from the picture I'd found, and then photos of them together with a small boy who looked exactly like Marcus at that age. The same dark hair, the same serious expression, the same way of holding his shoulders. My hands were shaking as I turned over photo after photo. The woman was in many of them, sometimes holding the boy, sometimes just smiling at the camera while Dad wrapped his arms around both of them. On the back of one photo, someone had written, David's first day of school, 1995. David. Not Marcus. David. I stared at the photo for a long moment, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Then I reached for the legal documents with trembling fingers. The first was a birth certificate for David Marcus Mitchell, born June 15, 1993, to Robert James Mitchell and Maria Elena Santos. The second was a name change document, filed when the child was 7 years old, changing his name from David Marcus Mitchell to Marcus David Mitchell. But it was the third document that made my world completely collapse. It was a custody agreement dated 2001, granting full custody of David Marcus Mitchell to Robert James Mitchell following the death of Maria Elena Santos Mitchell in a car accident. I sat back in the chair, staring at the documents. Marcus wasn't just my brother. He was my half-brother. Dad had been married before, had another family, had another life that he'd never told me about. And Marcus had known. He'd known all along. The jewelry box contained a simple gold wedding ring and a folded piece of paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately as Dad's, but it was younger, less careful than the letter he'd written to me. My dearest Maria, I know I'm not good with words, but I need you to know that you and David are my whole world. I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you both. When we get through this rough patch, I want to give you the wedding you deserve, the life you deserve. I promise I'll be the husband and father you both need. All my love, Bobby. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears streaming down my face. Dad had loved her, really loved her, and Marcus, David, had been their son, the golden child, the one who got Dad's attention, the one who could do no wrong. Of course he was. He was the son Dad had raised from birth, the child he'd fought to keep after losing the woman he loved. And I was... What? The consolation prize? The new family he'd built to replace the one he'd lost? I looked through the rest of the photos with new eyes. There were a few of Dad with a woman I now recognized as my mother, but they were different. Polite smiles instead of genuine laughter, posed pictures instead of candid moments. Even their wedding photo looked formal and distant compared to the casual intimacy Dad had shared with Maria. The last item in the box was a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Dad's handwriting. Inside was a short letter, dated just a month ago. Nick, if you're reading this, then you found the truth about our family. I know this will be hard to understand, but I need you to know that your mother and I loved you completely. You are not a replacement for David's mother or an attempt to recapture what I'd lost. You were a gift, a second chance at being the father I'd failed to be the first time around. I was distant not because I loved you less, but because I was terrified of losing you too. I see so much of your mother in you, her kindness, her strength, her ability to forgive. I hope someday you'll forgive me for not being honest about David's history. I thought I was protecting you both, but I see now that I was only protecting myself. You deserve better than a father who lives in the past. Be happy, sweetheart. Be free in ways I never learned how to be. I closed the letter and sat in the silence of the small room, trying to process 25 years of my life through this new lens. Every family dinner where Marcus seemed to know exactly what Dad wanted to hear. Every time Dad's face lit up when Marcus walked into a room. Every time I'd felt invisible and wondered what I'd done wrong. Marcus had known. He'd known all along that he was Dad's first son, the one who came from love, while I was the daughter who came from loneliness, and he'd watched me struggle with Dad's emotional distance without ever explaining why. I packed everything back into the box except the photos and the letter. I needed to confront Marcus, but first I needed to understand what else he'd taken from the box. What other secrets was he hiding? As I walked back through the bank's marble lobby, I thought about the man I'd buried last week. Not the distant father I'd known, but the young man in the photographs who'd loved completely and lost everything. The man who'd been so afraid of losing another family that he'd never learned how to fully love the one he had. And I thought about Marcus, who'd spent his whole life carrying the weight of being the son who remembered what Dad had lost. No wonder he'd been so certain there was nothing left for us in Dad's estate. He'd already taken what he thought he deserved. But there was still the question of what else had been in that box, and why Marcus had lied to me about it. It was time to find out. I sat in my car outside Marcus's downtown office building for 20 minutes, gathering the courage to go inside. The photos and documents from the safe deposit box lay scattered across my passenger seat like pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed. Through the windshield, I could see the gleaming glass towers of Chicago's financial district, the world Marcus had built for himself far from the modest house on Maple Street where we'd grown up. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. Marcus worked for an investment firm, the kind of place where people wore expensive suits and made decisions about other people's money. I'd only been to his office once before, when he'd first gotten the job 5 years ago. Even then, I'd felt out of place in my Target clothes and secondhand purse. Nicole, what a surprise. His secretary, a polished woman about my age, smiled at me from behind her desk. Marcus didn't mention you were coming by. He doesn't know I'm here. Is he available? He's in a meeting, but I think it's wrapping up. Can I tell him what this is about? I looked down at the manila envelope in my hands. Family business. She buzzed his office, and I heard his voice through the intercom. Professional and calm. Send her in. Marcus's office was exactly what I'd expected. Clean lines, expensive furniture, a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more than I made in a year. He stood up from behind his desk when I entered, his tie perfectly straight, his expression carefully neutral. Nick, I wasn't expecting you today. He came around the desk, and I saw the moment his eyes fell on the envelope in my hands. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. How did the bank visit go? You tell me. I set the envelope on his desk and pulled out the photos, spreading them across his pristine surface. Since you were there first. Marcus went very still. For a long moment, he just stared at the pictures of himself as a child, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Then he sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. How much do you know? He asked quietly. I know your real name is David. I know Maria Santos was your mother. I know Dad was married to her before he married my mom. I know she died in a car accident when you were 8. I pulled out the custody papers. I know you've been lying to me my entire life. Marcus, David, whoever he was, closed his eyes. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Because right now I'm feeling pretty simple. I'm feeling like the daughter who was never good enough, who could never figure out why her father looked at her like she was a stranger, and now I find out she was. You weren't a stranger. His voice was sharp, defensive. Dad loved you. Did he? Or did he love the idea of having a normal family again? Because those photos don't lie, Marcus. I can see the difference in his face, the way he looked at your mother, the way he looked at you when you were little. That's not how he ever looked at me. Marcus opened his eyes and stared at me for a long moment. You want to know the truth? The real truth? I think I've earned it. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. I remember everything. I remember Mom, my real mom, and how happy Dad was when we were all together. I remember the day she died, the sound of the phone ringing at 3 a.m., the way Dad collapsed in the hallway and couldn't stop crying. His voice was steady, but I could hear the old pain under. I remember the year after, when Dad barely spoke to anyone. He'd go to work, come home, and sit in his chair staring at nothing. I was 9 years old, and I had to learn how to make my own breakfast, how to do my own laundry, how to get myself to school because Dad had basically stopped functioning. I felt a stab of sympathy despite my anger. I'm sorry. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. Then he met your mother, and suddenly he wasn't broken anymore. He was trying to be the man he used to be, the father he thought he should be. But he never quite got there, did he? Because he was trying so hard to be normal that he forgot how to be real. Marcus turned back to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. You want to know why I got more attention? Because I was the constant reminder of what he'd lost. Every time he looked at me, he saw my mother's eyes, her smile, the life they'd planned together. He wasn't favoring me, Nick. He was punishing himself. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Think about it. When did Dad ever really relax with me? When did he ever let his guard down? He was always trying to be the perfect father, always compensating for the year he'd basically abandoned me. But with you, he could just be. He didn't have to perform. I shook my head. You're rewriting history. I was there, Marcus. I saw how he lit up when you walked into a room. And I saw how he actually laughed when you told him jokes. I saw how he read to you every night until you were 12. I saw how he taught you to drive in the church parking lot even though you were terrified of the stick shift. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Do you know what my driving lesson was? Figure it out. You're smart enough. I stared at him, my anger wavering. But the finances? You said you were helping him with his finances? I was helping him hide them. From you. Marcus sat back down, running his hands through his hair. Dad had been saving for years. Not just money, but investments, stocks, bonds. He was terrified that if something happened to him, you'd have nothing. You were the one he was worried about, not me. Then why did you lie? Why did you tell me there was nothing? Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was angry. I had spent my whole life being the responsible one, the one who handled things, the one who took care of Dad when he was falling apart. And then I found out that everything, his savings, his investments, his insurance policy, it was all meant for you. My breath caught. All of it? There's over $200,000, Nick. Plus the house, which is worth another $150,000. He left me $5,000 and a note saying he hoped I'd understand why you needed it more than I did. I stared at him, my mind reeling. But you have a good job. You have money. That's not the point. Marcus's composure finally cracked. It was never about the money. It was about finally being the son he chose instead of the son he was stuck with. But even in death, he chose you. The office was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. I looked at my brother, my half-brother, and saw something I'd never seen before. Not the golden child, not the favorite son, but a man who'd spent his whole life trying to earn love he thought he'd lost. What did you take from the safe deposit box? I asked gently. Marcus opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. This. Inside was a simple diamond ring. Not expensive, but clearly chosen with care. It was my mother's engagement ring. Dad kept it all these years. I wanted to have something of hers. Of course you did. I looked at the ring, then at the photos scattered across his desk. You should have it. She was your mother. But I shouldn't have lied to you. I shouldn't have tried to keep you from finding out about the money. No, you shouldn't have. But I understand why you did. I gathered up the photos and documents. We both grew up thinking we were competing for Dad's love. But maybe we were both wrong. Maybe he loved us differently. But he still loved us. Marcus wiped his eyes and tried to compose himself. What happens now? Are you going to contest the will? I don't know. I need time to think about all of this. I paused at the door. But Marcus, we're still family. Whatever else happens, we're still family. He nodded, unable to speak. As I left his office, I realized that everything I'd thought I knew about my life had been turned upside down. But for the first time since Dad died, I felt like I might actually understand who he was. Not the perfect father I'd wanted, not the distant man who'd disappointed me, but a human being who'd loved deeply, lost everything, and spent the rest of his life trying to figure out how to love again. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in the kitchen of the house on Maple Street, watching Marcus paint over the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since I was 10. We'd decided not to sell the house after all. At least, not yet. There was too much left unsaid, too much left undone, and somehow keeping Dad's house felt like keeping a part of him alive long enough to figure out who he really was. Hand me that brush, would you? Marcus called down from the stepladder. He'd taken a week off work to help me sort through Dad's belongings properly this time, without lies or hidden agendas. It was strange working alongside him like this. For the first time in our lives, we felt like actual siblings instead of competitors for attention that would never come. I passed him the brush and went back to sorting through the box of letters I'd found in Dad's desk. Most of them were bills and business correspondence, but scattered throughout were personal notes that painted a picture of a man I was just beginning to understand. Letters to his insurance agent about increasing his life insurance policy. Letters to his financial advisor about setting up a trust fund. Letters to Marcus's elementary school teachers, asking for advice on how to help a grieving child adjust. Listen to this, I said, unfolding a letter dated 15 years ago. It's from Dad to Dr. Peterson, that family therapist Mom made us see after she was diagnosed. Marcus climbed down from the ladder, wiping paint from his hands. I remember him. Nice guy. Very patient. Dad writes, Doctor Peterson, I wanted to thank you for your advice about how to talk to Nick about her mother's illness. You were right that children need honesty, but I find myself struggling with how much truth a 10-year-old can handle. I've already failed one child by not knowing how to help them through loss. I can't bear the thought of failing another. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He was talking about me when my mom died. Yeah, but look at this part. Nick is so much like her mother, brave and optimistic and determined to find the good in every situation. I see Elizabeth in her every day, and it gives me hope that maybe some part of my wife will continue on through our daughter. I just wish I knew how to tell her that without making her feel like she has to be someone she's not. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the growing pile of things that were helping me understand Dad's motivations. He did see me, Marcus. He did love me. He just didn't know how to show it. And I spent 25 years resenting you for getting something I thought I deserved more. Marcus sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten countless silent dinners while Dad read the newspaper. I'm sorry, Nick, for lying about the money, for not telling you about my mom, for making you feel like you had to compete with me. We were both just kids trying to figure out why our dad was sad all the time. Neither of us understood that it wasn't our fault. Marcus nodded toward the stack of financial documents we'd been going through. Have you decided what you want to do about the inheritance? I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. The money was more than I'd ever imagined having, enough to pay off my student loans, buy a house, maybe even start the nonprofit I'd always dreamed of running. But it felt complicated, loaded with all the emotions and misunderstandings that had defined our family. I want to split it, I said. 50-50. Nick, you don't have to do that. Dad wanted you to have it. Dad wanted both of us to be okay. He left you that note saying he hoped you'd understand why I needed it more, but that was before he knew you'd grown up to be successful and responsible. If he could see you now, see how you've built a good life for yourself, I think he'd want us to share it. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. That's incredibly generous. It's not generous. It's fair. Besides, I have an idea for what we could do with some of it. I pulled out a folder I'd been working on for the past week. I want to set up a scholarship fund for kids who've lost parents. Kids like you were, like I was. Kids who need help figuring out how to keep going when their world falls apart. Marcus looked through the preliminary paperwork I'd drafted. The Robert and Maria Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund and the Elizabeth Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. All three of them. All the people Dad loved. All the lives that mattered. Nick, this is beautiful. But are you sure? This would take a significant portion of the money. I'm sure. I think Dad would love it. He spent so much energy trying to protect us from loss that he forgot to teach us how to grow from it. Maybe we can help other kids learn that lesson. We spent the rest of the afternoon going through more of Dad's things, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of sorting through the debris of a life we didn't understand, we were collecting pieces of a story that was finally starting to make sense. In Mom's sewing room, which Dad had left untouched for 15 years, we found a box of letters she'd written to him during their courtship. Reading them, I could see how she'd slowly, patiently helped him learn to love again after Maria's death. She'd known about his first marriage, had understood that she was helping him heal, and had loved him enough to be okay with coming second to a ghost. She was amazing, Marcus said, reading over my shoulder. I never really knew her, but she was amazing. She would have loved you if she'd had the chance. She always wanted you to feel like her son, too. In the basement, we found Dad's workshop, and hidden behind his toolbox was another envelope with both our names on it. Inside was a letter dated just a month before he died. Marcus and Nick, I read aloud. If you're reading this together, then maybe I finally did something right. I know I wasn't the father either of you deserved. I was so afraid of losing the people I loved that I forgot to actually love them while I had them. Marcus, you were the son who saved my life when I thought it was over. Nick, you were the daughter who showed me it was possible to be happy again. I love you both more than I ever knew how to say. Take care of each other. Love, Dad. We sat on Dad's workbench, crying and laughing, and finally understanding. 6 months later, Marcus and I stood together at the community center downtown, watching as the first recipients of the Mitchell Family Memorial Scholarship received their awards. The scholarship provided not just money for college, but counseling services and mentorship programs for young people who'd experienced the loss of a parent. I think he would have been proud, Marcus said, watching a 17-year-old girl whose mother had died of cancer accept her award with tears in her eyes. I think he would have been amazed that we figured out how to work together. Speaking of which, Marcus pulled an envelope from his pocket. I have something for you. Inside was a deed transferring half ownership of the house on Maple Street to me. I thought you might want to move back in, fix it up, make it feel like home again. I looked at the deed, then at my brother, my half-brother, my family, my friend, and smiled. Only if you help me paint the kitchen. That yellow is really awful. Deal. But I'm picking the color this time. As we walked back to the car, I thought about Dad and how much he would have loved seeing us like this. Not competing for his attention, not trying to earn love we thought was scarce, but just being the family he'd always hoped we could become. He'd left us more than money in that safe deposit box. He'd left us the truth about who we were, who he was, and who we could be if we stopped being afraid of loss and started embracing love. It had taken 25 years and a funeral, but we'd finally learned the lesson Dad had been too afraid to teach us. That families aren't just about blood or shared history. They're about choosing to love each other, again and again, even when it's complicated, even when it hurts, even when you don't understand each other completely. Maybe especially then. As Marcus and I drove through the Chicago streets toward home, our home now, the place where we'd learned to be brother and sister, I realized that Dad's greatest gift wasn't the money he'd saved or the house he'd left us. It was the chance to finally become the family we'd always been meant to be. And that was worth more than any inheritance could ever be.